Right, now I can go ahead.
Thanks very much, everybody. And it's good that you're all here for what I think will be a fascinating talk. I don't think we've had one focusing on any particular kind of bird or animal, at least not for a while. So it's a great pleasure to have a talk on Swift this evening from a real local expert and to learn a bit more about some of the birds with whom we share Hertford. There are, I think, at least a few of them, hopefully, but it's over to Clive Fleming, who's put so much of himself into trying to find out how they are and how we can help them.
Actually. Okay, well, thank you very much, Malcolm, and thanks for the invite, and thanks to Barry and Mike for helping us set up, because I should say to my wife Helen, who's just sat next to me here and has the technical expertise. Yes, Hertford Swift Group, I'm going to say a little bit about that. I just thought I'd say hello before I disappear behind the slides for a while, and then if we can ask some questions when I'm through with the slides. So we'll get straight on with the sharing our screen, which will just take a couple of seconds. Bear with us.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on. Back. So, back.
There we are. So Swift's in Hertford, Hertford Swift Group, and what I'm going to talk about is the Swift. Just it's a bird that's easily confused with others, so worth just checking our ID a little bit before we start. Its range across the world, actually, its biology, the way it lives, migration, which is fascinating, I hope you'll find, why swifts are declining in the UK and other parts of Western Europe. Swifts in Hertford, and this is a story, I think, from absolute abundance in the history of this town to what is it's now on the red list, and that's true for pretty well all of the UK now, and why that has happened. And then what we can do to help the numbers recover. And this is a bird that we can help recover. And just as that other species are starting to turn the corner, like the house sparrow, hopefully we'll be able to do something for the common swift in Hertford, and others are doing the same across the UK. And then at the end, if you've got any questions, please do ask. So I thought I'd start with just a very quick reminder of swifts versus other species which are similar, but they're not actually related. These three are related to each other. The swallow, in the middle there, you've got the sand martin, and on the right, you've got the house martin, all of which can be found in or around Hertford, although they're pretty scarce. The house martin, sadly, is declining fast like the swift, although it's more abundant across the UK. Sand martin you can find down the Lee Valley. Gravel extraction was very good for sand martin, so you can see those. And the swallow you'll find on farms around Hertford, typically nests in barns. So they're species that have evolved similar characteristics. They come here for the summer also, although not for a shorter time as the swift, but they are in fact not related. So just checking our ID. The other thing you might see around Hertford, and we're blessed with these birds, is a bird called the hobby. They nest in Molewood. They nest down at Amwell and one or two other places around here, and they're commonly described as like a giant swift. Worth always, if you see something that looks like a swift, but it's actually a bit big and it's zooming around real fast, it could be a hobby. It's a real possibility in Hertford that we do well for them. And it actually is one of the few species that's capable of catching a swift, but it's not a swift. This is a swift. Unlike those other species, it's not got much white on it. It's got a tiny little bit of pale around the throat, but otherwise it's a sooty black-brown bird with conspicuously long wings. And here's another picture of it. This is a picture of a bird that's fed well and has a ball of insects in its crop. And if you're lucky, you can see that. Again, that coal black brown plumage with a pale throat. Very lightweight and aerodynamic. You're talking about 56 grams. That's a really lightweight bird. Heavier than those other species I've mentioned, but still, in the overall scheme of things, not much more than a Cadbury's chocolate egg. Long size-shaped wings. I'll come back to the wings in a minute because they are very particular. It can eat up to 20,000 insects in a day. It's constantly in the air, flies about 800 kilometers a day, and eats a lot of insects. They don't breed till they're 3 or 4 years old, which again is important in terms of what we're going to say about boxes and so on. And they've evolved in a relatively short time, in historical terms, to live with human beings. Historically, you'd find them in cliffs before we started building nice buildings for them to inhabit. And they'd also nest in cracks in trees. And you do get them still. If you go to the beautiful Abernethy pine forest up in Scotland, the ancient pine woods, there are still a few tree nesting swifts there, but it's a rarity now in the UK. And generally speaking, they have evolved to live with us. That, in a way, has become both their opportunity, but is also currently the reason for their downfall. So urban nest sites. They usually have 2 or 3 chicks per year, and they live a long time for what is a relatively small bird, typically 9 years. There has been one that was ringed and recovered, which is quite rare, 21 years old, so quite a long-lived bird. Probably worth doing a few of the wow things about swifts, because we've all got blue tits, robins and blackbirds, much beloved in our gardens, but the swifts have got a few sort of kind of extra pizzazz. They live in the air except when they're nesting. It's a bit difficult to get your head around this, but a young swift, when it fledges, it won't breed for 3 or 4 years, and it's quite likely to spend all of that time in the air, unless it's downed by the weather. So it feeds aloft, it drinks aloft, it sleeps aloft. They go way high up, close off half their brain, close off one eye, and drift into the wind just to keep their lift up, and then fly back up again, switch their brain back on and do it again. They don't perch, they've got very, very tiny feet. So if you've got birds perched on your house, could be one of those birds we mentioned earlier, but it's not going to be a swift. They've got tiny feet. Indeed, their closest relative, also with tiny feet, is a hummingbird. And they're amongst the fastest birds in level flight. So you've got peregrine falcons, also now happily resident in Hertford on All Saints Church. They're the fastest bird on the planet, so we're doing quite well for fast birds. But the swift in level flight gets up to about 70 miles an hour, and it's one of the joys of summer to see them zooming around at great speed around the rooftops. They target their prey, so they do zoom around catching insects, but they're not like a sort of basking shark on wings that has its mouth open, hoovers up insects. They actually target what they eat, so they will make sure they don't eat things with stings, for instance. And adults will fly a long way to feed. So they're a very mysterious bird. You'll see them one day around their nest sites where you think you're going to see them the next day. Apparently the weather's set, but they've gone off somewhere else to feed because they sort of watch each other and they know there's a hatch of something a few miles away. Birds in southern England have been recorded going over to France to feed for the day and coming back. So they go a long way, and they will go a particularly long way when the weather is bad. So they can avoid bad weather to some extent, and if that's what they need to do to feed, they will fly a long way. And the young are particularly adapted to that, so they can actually slow their metabolism right down until their parents finally come back with food. So these make it a pretty special bird. There's not nothing wrong with those other species, but it has got the wow factor. Also worth mentioning its flight capability. So very fast, but also very maneuverable. Those flight feathers that you can see there, those longest feathers, which is called the hand on a bird to get technical. They are some of the longest flight feathers of any bird on the planet, and other swifts have them. There are about 50 swifts families across 50 swift species across the world. And then the other bones and muscles are tight into the body. And if you ever handle the birds, they're really muscular and tubular and totally aerodynamic. And the other thing they can do, like their hummingbird relatives, is tilt those joints. So each point of those joints you can sort of tilt, and that allows them to capture the maximum benefit from flying through the air and the maximum maneuverability. And the poor birds have been put into wind tunnels by Swedish and other aerodynamics engineers to test them. They're trying to basically see what they do so they can copy that for the flight of fighter aircraft. So they are pretty special flyers. And here they are in the nest with those great long wings, and that's a typical nest. We'll come back to nesting later. They come into a tiny hole there, and you can see they're all wing. At the bottom of the body, they've got those tiny feet. They're quite grippy feet. They can grip onto a wall, but walking is really not something they do terribly well. They can shuffle along if they need to, but once they're on the ground, they're in trouble. So it's all about wings and flying with the swifts. Lovely picture that, and that's what we hope to get more of in Hertford, and what would have been very common in Hertford over the centuries. Swift migration, migratory bird. It's one of the birds that's with us for the shortest time in the summer. Don't usually arrive until the end of the first week in May. You'll get the odd bird that is earlier, and you'll get birds that stay a bit longer, but generally arrive in early May and leave us before the end of July. So that's a short time to be staying with us. And once they get here, for the adults, it's straight down to breeding. But migration, so they're coming back from Africa. If I do the migration actually from the UK, this bird, quite famous swift A322, which isn't a road name, it's actually a swift that was captured at Foulmere, which some of you may know it's up the way towards Cambridge. There's an RSPB reserve there, actually quite a nice one if you hasn't visited. And this guy flew down to the Congo in about 5 days and stopped off in Extremadura. You see the arrows going down there. That first blob of purple is southwest central Spain. They feed over the cork oak forest in Extremadura, then down the African coast, Morocco, Algeria, and down and across towards the Congo. They spend a lot of the time in the Congo during the winter months, and indeed quite a lot of them head over towards the Mozambique coasts. And this is all through satellite tracking. We've only known this in relatively recent times. We always knew we went to South Africa, but quite how they what they did when they got there. And then back to the Congo for another couple of months, and then they start the reverse migration in early April. One of the other things I discovered with these birds is that they spend a long time over mangroves in Liberia, which is the blue blob that you can see in West Africa there, the big one. And very, very important and slightly concerning because a lot of those mangroves are under threat from coastal development and global warming to some extent. So that this bird then flew back a different route to the way it had come down over the Sahara. Easier for this bird than for some because it is capable of flight and long distances and can do that 800 kilometers in a day. But you see there, 28th of the 4th, it left Liberia. And then by the start of May, it's up on the North African coast. And then pretty well 3rd of May in Morocco and back at Foulmere on the 8th. So, you know, they're not mucking about. That's a pretty spectacular migration. And the satellite transmitters, as for many other species, have absolutely revolutionized knowledge of what these birds are up to. Probably just don't worry too much about the detail of this slide, just concentrate on the colors, the sort of reddy ochre color at the top, terracotta, I suppose. That is the summer range of the swift. And it's a very widespread species, as you can see. This is the common swift. There are many other swifts within this sort of the area covered by this, but you know, the common swift is a good title globally. It's not doing too badly. The International Union of Nature Conservation estimate is 95 to 160 million pairs. A lot of birds. It's in the west of Europe in particular that it's doing so badly. The blue is the places that it goes to spend the winter. A lot of the birds from further over in the range, over towards China and Mongolia, come to the west of Africa, they've now discovered. Our birds, as I've just mentioned, tend to be more down to the Congo and Mozambique. So it's a bird you can see across much of the planet, quite a large range. But our birds, that is the migration route that they take. Sadly, swifts are not doing well in the UK, and this is also true for much of Western Europe, and the reasons are almost certainly the same. The RSPB and the British Trust for Ornithology monitor birds, of course. Not an easy bird to monitor, the swift, because they're so fast and they're so discreet in their nesting habits. But the estimates are that they've declined by approaching 60% from the mid-90s through to 2018. And that's a pretty drastic decline by any standards. It went onto the red list at the end of 2021 because of that short period in which it had declined so much. And the house martin actually went on to the red list at the same time, also a fairly sharp decline. In terms of numbers in the UK, swift population, is the RSPB estimate is 59,000 pairs. The house martin is still at about 500,000 pairs. So in relative terms, there's more house martins around, but the speed of decline has been very fast again. And you can see that in Hertford also. The reasons, principally, we think loss of nesting places. Hertford, towns across the UK in a period of relative economic prosperity in the second half of the 20th century and into this century, have lots of buildings have been modernised, lots of new buildings have been built, lots of old buildings have been lost. With those, lots of opportunities for swifts to nest. New buildings generally, we'll come back to this, are not swift friendly. Old buildings were more, but a lot of those old buildings have been restored, modernised for good reasons, good reasons to put insulation in your loft and do your soffits, climate change and so on. But there are ways to do that that will keep the swifts there. Sadly, we haven't been doing that for the last 30 or 40 years, and the swifts have declined. Possibly also, almost certainly, but difficult to quantify, lack of food, industrial farming, and we also, there's a lot of talk about there being far fewer insects in our environment at the moment, and possibly also increasingly migration issues. There have been some pretty spectacular crashes of swifts and martins due to really bad weather incidents during our migration. There was a really, really catastrophic storm in Greece 2 or 3 years back, and the ground was littered with swifts and martins. They were just taken out of the area in large numbers. And certainly weather does affect these birds. They're very, very prone to bad weather events. Swifts like older buildings. The last international conference on swifts was held in this place, which is Segovia in Spain, which if you ever get the chance to go there, many of you perhaps have been there, is absolutely spectacular. Has this wonderful Roman aqueduct. It's built of large granite blocks with no mortar. They knew what they're about, those Romans. The great thing for swifts is it's got lots of nooks and crannies, even though it's granite. It's had 2,000 years to sort of weather a bit, and it's absolutely crammed with them. It's probably the best sort of man-made swift box in Europe, I'd say. And if you ever get a chance to go there, it's got all sorts of other wonderful things in the environs of the town. They've got choughs, red-billed choughs nesting in holes in the walls in their town as well. But they do like older buildings, and it's a lot of those older buildings. That one's still there, but we've lost a lot of them. Here's a few places in Hertford that some of you may recognise that we've lost in relatively recent times. I came to Hertford about 30 odd years ago. Folly Bridge here, Cooper's Yard, I think that's called. Peter Ruffles kindly put me onto this, but I remember that building on the left of that black and white picture was still there when I came, and in the summer it was absolutely crammed with swifts. It was quite derelict, and there were lots of gaps in that slate roof. Quite a small building for swifts, actually, not particularly tall, absolutely crammed with swifts. Not there now. There are a couple of pairs left on Folly Island, but those buildings have gone. So they were there. Another place where people remember them in large numbers, very large colony, is the old workhouse down on the Ware Road. I think I've slightly got the picture wrong with the care centre here, the day centre. I think that building was just slightly further up the road where there are now some very large flats. And there's a couple of small swift colonies close by on either side of that area. But that large colony has gone. Birchley Green, well, it's been redeveloped within most of our lifetimes at least once. Had house martins nesting within the last 30 years, actually. But as you can see, the buildings there were being demolished in the 80s, at the end of the 80s. And those medieval buildings, plaster and lath, terracotta tiles on the roof, and would have historically been full of swifts and I'm sure other things, bats and so on. So Butchery Green, Birchley Green, all of those buildings were absolutely, perfect for swifts. And if any of you, I'm sure many of you did listen to the lockdown talks that the Hertford Museum did about lost buildings. It was just when you went through there's a little booklet that goes with it. Absolutely loads of buildings. You look at them with those louvers and slate roofs, and I just think this town must have had a very, very abundant swift population back in the day, and a lot of that has gone. It's a bit different. The interesting about the swift is it's been so common that people almost took it for granted. And so these are 4 books on the birds of Hertfordshire from relatively recent times. The first there is from about 1959, Brian Sage, and he basically says this bird is so common, we haven't bothered surveying it, but you can find it pretty well everywhere. Once you started to get into the 80s, a wonderful book by Chris Mead, very famous ornithologist, started to say, better just keep an eye out. Some of our older buildings are going. and some of the swifts are maybe losing out, not sure, haven't surveyed, maybe we should. Then we got the breeding birds of Hertfordshire with the picture of the hobby, bottom left-hand corner. Perhaps we should, we think that Hertford and Ware are losing some of their swifts. Perhaps we should survey, but maybe they're moving to other towns. I don't think anybody looked too hard, nobody ever counted. Perhaps we should do a survey. Survey wasn't done. Birds of Hertfordshire now, that's 2017. You know, swifts are declining. They're still around in many parts of the town. They're nothing like they were. So on our watch, really, over 50 odd years, they've gone from being an abundant bird. The first one there, Brian Sage's book, talks about a hospital in Bishop Stortford with a colony of at least 100 pairs. And if you found a colony of 100 pairs of swifts anywhere in Hertfordshire now, you'd be jumping for joy. I should say Bishop Stortford have been on to us, and with our friends up in North East Hertfordshire, we're going to be doing quite a lot of work with them along the river, and we put some boxes on back onto the hospital, but it will be a long time before we have 100 pairs back on there. So, you know, it's a long story of decline. That time period of the mid-90s to 2018, where we talk about a 60-odd% decline, I think if you project that back further, you'd have far more swifts even than we had in the mid-90s, far more. So where are the swifts now in Hertford? Well, we are still looking, but we've got a pretty good take on where they are now. And these are some of the strongholds. Seal Road, Cromwell Road, near that old workhouse site, and Page Road on the other side of the old workhouse site, up the hill towards Foxhole. It's very good. Goslin Road, around Holy Trinity Church, is good. Port Vale is still good. George Street in particular, there's one house there that has got 7 nests in it, which is extraordinary for Hertford nowadays. St Andrew's Street still has, we'll come back to that, still has swifts. There's a few hanging on in North Road and North Road Avenue. Wellington Street, Parkhurst Road, we know they're there. We haven't managed to locate the nests there. We spend a lot of time snooping around people's gardens and peeking over their walls, but you have to be a bit careful, and swifts don't come back to their nests that often, so we're still looking. Ware Road still has a handful of nests. Talbot Street has some nests in the old TV washing machine repair shop. There's 2 nests on the side of there. If you're ever down there in the summer, keep your eyes peeled. And in the town centre, where there used to be many more, Bull Plain, there's a nest literally on the end of the museum where it meets the next building as you head towards the town. St John's Court has 3 pairs, and there's a pair hanging on between the Money Matters shop and the betting shop, just opposite the court there. So there's the odd pairs hanging in there in the town centre, but not anything like they used to be. So just quickly on these 4 streets, Seal Road, excellent place for swifts, Cromwell Road, Port Vale and Goslin Road. Basically, they've all got pre-war houses, or some of them going well back into the Victorian era. And the common factor pretty well is the eaves. It's all about the eaves, if you excuse the... So these are open eaves, well-ventilated roofs, and many of the houses have maintained their open eaves. A lot of them have had their soffits done, so those nests have been lost. But where you've got these open eaves, you sometimes get a number of swifts nests. So the house in the middle there is a house on Goslin Road, and that has got 4 swift nests in it. So if you've got the right conditions, you will get a lot of swifts. They nest colonially. They're very happy to nest cheek by jowl. So if you've got the right conditions, they will come and they will nest in numbers. But again, a lot of those houses, fortunately, have got the right eaves, but they could easily be lost. So Hertford Swift Group, we're trying to do something about this. It was started by a lady called Jenny Rawson, who worked for Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust, and she moved on in 2021 to go back to Suffolk, where she's from, and she handed over to me. And the aims of the group are to raise awareness, events like this, sourcing and putting up boxes, which I'll mention in a moment, and then trying to get a handle on what we've got in terms of swift, what's left. We've all watched the decline and have been aware of it. There's still a reasonable number around, but nothing like we should have. Trying to find where the nests are, trying to count the birds, and logging those on the RSPB's app, a splendid app they've got called Swift Mapper, which I shall come to in a second. So first of all, getting hold of swift boxes, not always easy. There's a load of people around the country doing exactly this sort of thing. And you need great people who build swift boxes. King of the swift box builders is undoubtedly John Stimson, who's up in the Fens, an absolutely wonderful man, lovely bloke. And he has devoted his retirement to building swift boxes. And when we last went to see him to pick up this batch, he had built 32,000 and counting in his garage. That's his garage there. And he's 81, I think now, and he is still going strong, wonderful bloke. And he's been all over the media, The Guardian, on the BBC, ITV, you know, quite rightly so. And he got the MBE as well for his services to Swifts. And those boxes work as well. They're all over the country and they work, but birds are using them. So well done, John. And that's the back of our Nissan Duke with 50 Swift boxes in. Don't try this on speed bumps. If you do it very gently, because it can be quite alarming. Two other people are very important to our efforts. On the left, Jake Foote. If you've got a Swift box, you need it putting up. And actually, you don't want to put it up. You want your box to be at a certain height. And if you're going to do that, you need to be on a ladder. And quite a lot of Hertford is on slopes. You need to know what you're doing on a ladder, because you've got to have a fairly hefty drill and so on and so forth. So you need somebody who's totally competent in working on a ladder and putting the box up. Jake is that. He lives down in Cromwell Road. We discovered swifts nesting in his house this year. So, God has blessed him with his reward of nesting swifts. And he has put up all of the boxes that we've put up so far. So we're very grateful to Jake, and he's very happy to do it. Young, and if anybody needs various jobs doing around the house, we can give you his details, because he's extremely reliable, extremely careful and precise, and come to strongly recommended. The other gentleman who we came across fairly early on in our efforts on this was Baz Johns, pictured here, down on the Ware Road. And Baz and Karen are tuned in today, I think, are members of your esteemed society. And Baz met us doing our first installation and said, I can help you do that. And he did. And he built well over half the boxes we've put up so far, and did it like, I gave him the plans one day, and with 2 days, first boxes have been built. And it's just been absolutely brilliant, because boxes are at a premium. There are so many people keen to get involved with us around the country. And we can't thank Baz and Karen and all the other people who've helped enough. Just a bit about boxes. They need to be high, 4.5 to 5 meters, preferably. Try and avoid south-facing walls, because if it catches a lot of sun, the young can overheat, and they really overheat. And we saw a bit of that this very hot summer. The young sometimes come out of the nest too early, and they have to be rescued if they can, or else, worst case scenario, a cat will get them. Need a bit of clear flying air around the box, I think, come in and out. They fly into the box at about 40 miles an hour. And they zoom and close their wings and in. So they really need to have a bit of clear air around it. Having said that, they're extremely good at zooming around obstacles. Playing swift calls, if you've got a box, greatly increases the chance of getting interest. And the interest you're most likely to get in the early days of having a box is from young birds. So the adults come back in early May. They usually go straight back to their breeding site and get on with it, basically. I should have said the other wow factor, they mate in the air as well. I won't go, it's pretty spectacular if you're lucky enough to see it. I've seen it a couple of times, many years of swift watching, and they actually mate in the air. So they even, do that, and then, finally they come back, and if they're breeding, they'll touch down and go into a box. But for boxes to be successful, they usually need to be up 2, 3, probably more years, and often many more years. But there are many stories of people having them up for 10 years and suddenly they get used. One of the things you can do is play calls. The calls attract the young birds in. Those young birds don't come back often till well into June, and they don't stay long. So in the summer, later in the summer, late June into mid-July, you'll see a lot more swifts around. Not necessarily the adults and the fledged birds, but a lot of these are young birds marauding, zooming up to eaves, clinging on briefly to the wall to see what's there, and looking for places to breed in future years. And what we want is for them to find those boxes, which is why we're putting lots of them up, and to know that they're there and have them in their mental map when they come back a couple of, in 2 or 3 years' time to breed. So it does take time, but it does work. And in the meantime, you may attract other species. So one of the things we know is house sparrows get into them very quickly, and house sparrows have been red listed for many years. They've declined incredibly across Europe since the 1980s. The reasons are not totally understood, probably lack of insects at certain times of the year, but yeah, bit of a mystery. But the good thing is they're turning the corner, and swift boxes are helping them. If a swift fancies the box, it'll kick a sparrow out, and it'll just make its nest on top of what the sparrow's done. So there's a bit of, argy-bargy between the two, but the swift generally rules the roost. So playing swift calls, you can do this really simply. If you've got a box on your eave, you can just sit there of an evening and get your mobile phone out, dial up there's loads of sites with swift calls on, and just point it in the air. It can get really spectacular. If you've got young birds about, they'll start dive-bombing the box. We had one get into a bathroom because it was the bathroom window had been left open this summer. But they do check out boxes. You can get more sophisticated devices. We've been using these on a number of our projects. You just plug in and play. You can get an old-fashioned CD. They're all available from Swift Conservation, but good bits makes a huge difference. So Hertford Swift Group, in terms of putting up boxes, we've done 7 installation days this year, 320 boxes. So that's Jake up and down a ladder at least 640 times, sometimes a bit more. And they are pretty well all over town, and we've caught a few bug boxes and bat boxes along the way. So that's a goodly number, but we've got at least 200 coming this year and probably more. And we're going to keep going because there's lots of areas of Hertford we haven't covered. And to be honest, to replicate the number of nesting opportunities that swifts would have had in earlier years in Hertford, you could put up thousands when our houses were and buildings were rather less tidy. So we're basically trying to boost the colonies that are there. So we put a lot around the colonies that are there in the places that I mentioned earlier, and also get some new ones going. The house on the right there is our house, which is our house sparrow colony at the moment, but that is a swift box. Yeah, we had 6 pairs of breeding house sparrow this year, 3 broods for some of them. So, that boosted the house sparrow population very well. I think Baz, who's on the call, has had a great tit in his, we have at least 2 pairs of great tits. So and the swifts have been checking quite a number of them out. We've also been putting them up. So our house is in an area where we see swifts, but not often. But there are boxes all the way up the street now because my neighbours, just to keep me quiet, say yes, yes, whatever. And we're playing calls. And in time, I'm pretty confident that we'll get the birds. And we've been leafleting, as you can see there, and we've been putting the leaflets through, and the response rate has been phenomenal across Hertford. The number of people that want to get involved has been terrific. We've done some specific projects. This is Gavin Vickery from North East Hart Swifts. This is in the belfry of St Andrew's Church, where basically St Andrew's Church is louvered, as you'll probably be aware. And behind those louvers are some pretty thick pine panelling, which has been put there in earlier years to stop, I think, pigeons getting in and jackdaws. Basically, we cut small holes in front of those, and Gavin built those boxes. He's done a number of belfry boxes in Hertford, Reed, Barley, he's doing Royston. We've got a few other projects going on all the way over in Gaddesden, actually in Chilterns. We've got something going on there. So we put 12 in there. We've been playing the calls with one of those calling machines that was on last slide, and we're hopeful. There's a really good area for swifts still around in St Andrew Street, and there were around 40 flying around the tower at peak times last summer when those young birds were back. And with the good help of our mayor and other councillors, I'm delighted to say we got 12 boxes onto the Seed Warehouse, which is one of the few buildings in Hertford that the town council owns. I'm sure you guys probably know that better than I. We've got some other buildings that I'll mention another in the town centre that we will be focusing on. Finding nests isn't easy. House martins, you've got a nice mud cut. It's pretty damn obvious that there's a house martin there, and the birds come and go quite a lot. Swallows similarly, they're going to and fro, and the nests in barns and other buildings are pretty obvious. Swifts don't visit their nests as often, anything like as often. They spend a lot of time away building up that large ball of food, and then come to the nest very periodically, and they fly in very fast, disappear very fast, and then don't come out again for 20 or 30 minutes quite often, sometimes sooner. So you have to really spend a lot of time looking at eaves, and you can easily blink and you miss it. And so a lot of people don't even know they've got nesting swifts because they're so discreet. These are a few places where we have got them in central Hertford. Cowbridge is still quite a good area. So you've got the town church, Hertford Town Church here. There's 2 pairs there, one in a hole in the wall and one just next to one of the cross beams in the roof. Just by the museum there, right in that corner. It took me hours to track that down. They came in right at dusk, low over the roof opposite, right down to the ground, and then just shot up into the nest. And then that next one is the back of Wallace House, which is one of the most important buildings in Hertford for swifts, very appropriately, given its former home of a very famous naturalist. There are 7 nests in the back this year, at least 1 in the front. There may be more. And it's a great place to watch swifts. If you want to see swifts at the nest and really going for it, particularly late on in the evening, that you can't beat that really in Hertford. On the right there, you've got another house in Gosling Road where we thought we found 2 nests, but we didn't realise till quite late on that we got 2 more. So we think we know what we found this year, but we've still got a lot to find. But we think we've got a pretty good take on what the population is. So planning, you guys are good at this. I've got to do better at it. Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust are doing quite a lot on this as well, and I'm far more expert than I. But there's a lot of applications for buildings in Hertford that ought to have swifts, that have had swifts probably for centuries in their history, literally centuries. And it ought to be part of the heritage of those buildings that's maintained. So you've got 3 places there. You've got the new development on Birchley Green, which I'll come back to. You've got the St Nicholas Hall next to St Andrews, where the kind new owners have done quite a lot of work to the place to turn it into a house, and they're going to have some boxes on there. And then you've got the old, what I call the old motorcycle shop on Dimsdale Street, or Dimsdale Road, Dimsdale Street, somebody will tell me later. And that's got swifts. If you look at the Portaloo there, which is now gone, but the window there's 2 swifts nests right above there, and the birds zoom right across the road and up into there. So just opposite Hertford Town Church. So that's a good little area to watch swifts of an evening as well. And there's a nest in the brewery also. Again, I'll come back to the brewery. If you're talking about planning, the thing you're really after is a swift brick. These are fantastic. They've been really specially designed. They come in different fabrics, and you can laser cut the brick that's being used for the building, or you can use the render that's being used for the building. It's built in, it's totally fireproof, meets all the building regs. Cheap as chips, literally cheap as chips. Cheaper than actually most boxes that are on the market. You can get them for different cavity sizes, and it lasts as long as the building. So boxes are great, they'll last about 30 years, but these are even better. If we can get these in buildings across Hertford, we'll really undo the damage that has been done over the last number of years. There is a swift brick petition. This lady, I think we're after the watershed nearly. This young lady on the left is Hannah Bourne-Taylor, who, to her great credit, has started a petition to get basically swift bricks on all new housing developments for swifts, obviously. And she dressed sort of, discuss, as a swift. And took her case to 10 Downing Street, and also did a speech at Speakers Forum to her great credit. And I think that number is a bit out of date now, but do go on to the, if you're interested, onto the petition site on gov.uk, and you can, parliament.uk, sorry, and you can sign up on the petition. Certainly the best practice on planning is to get swift bricks into all new developments, and Hertfordshire's got some pretty good biodiversity aims, but it hasn't quite translated to the extent that it has in other parts of the country. So Exeter, Brighton, Oxford City Councils, Duchy of Cornwall, they're all putting basically a swift brick into each new house building, multiples on some buildings as well. Requirements for biodiversity net gain, that's a concept that's built into Hertford planning now, I think, but again, it's a bit slow to come through, and REBA have got plenty of advice on this as well. And all the work's been done for swifts. Some really expert people worked with architects. It's all there, off the shelf, cheap. It's so easy. It's a no-brainer. And Callar Homes, to their great credit, down in Kings Barton in Hampshire. Hampshire Swifts are a fantastic organisation. Have done lots of this sort of stuff. Under duress, it has to be said, eventually, but I think they've now decided it's the right thing to do anyway. I've put 1,500 swift bricks into 1,500 houses. And they say, you can see a brilliant video from the one show. It's on YouTube. Do go and watch it, which is a great combination of people doing things for Swifts in a grade 1 listed building and helping them come back in there because they've been blocked off there as well, a building which would have had them for centuries, and doing this Colour Homes thing. So it's a lovely video. The link is there. Check it out. And that's where we want to end up. There's no reason why, if we're building in Hertford, we shouldn't be building for these birds. Sometimes, though, the environmental impact assessments are a bit thin, and biodiversity is treated as a green space issue and not as an urban issue. And if you take the lack of biodiversity in urban environments that we have currently, in some respects, not all, we've got peregrines, we've got houseflowers coming back, so on and so forth, then you're onto a loser. You have to think, what was here historically? What do we know within living memory was here historically, and how can we get that back? So don't do the minimum, be ambitious. Lots of people are starting to do this. There's a real momentum gathering around this, and that's kind of where we want to be. And we need to protect some of those key sites. I gather, somebody may know better than I, that this Wallace House is owned by a property company down Wembley Way. It's got a great yawning hole in the front eaves at the moment, soffits, which is great for Swifts, but somebody's going to get up there and repair it. And if they ever modernise that place, that will take out potentially about 10% of Hertford's remaining Swift population in one fell swoop. So, you know, I think when we're looking at those buildings, we've got to think what's the natural history of them as well. And I'm sure Alfred Russel Wallace would smile kindly on our efforts to keep them in that building. Good news, we think from the work we've done over the last year or so that we've probably got about 100 breeding pairs still in Hertford. And a good number of young birds were back this summer. And a number of people said, we think there were more young birds in that period in June, July than we remembered seeing in the previous year. Previous year, you know, it was scarily quiet at those times. Swifts are starting to use nest boxes in Hertford. They're using them across the country, but they are using them on a house that's a few years ahead of us in North Road Avenue, an area that used to have lots of Swifts. Most of the soffits have been done. One of the residents put up boxes a number of years ago, and she has 6 pairs on her house now. Good, all credit to her. And we put up boxes on the house just opposite, where the builder had refused to replace Swift boxes because he didn't think they looked nice next to his nice new building work, and was sacked on the spot by the owner, I'm pleased to say. We put them up and the birds started to investigate them straight away. So yeah, it does make a difference. And there's a lot of people interested in helping. We've got over 400 boxes and bricks in Hertford now, and more developments coming with boxes and bricks on them. We've got plenty to put up this year. This is what Swift Mapper looks now for Hertford. And if you look at Swift Mapper, you can go into the RSPB Swift Mapper, do have a look. I can't manipulate this online. The greens are boxes. If you pan out there from this when you go out, if you have a look at it online, you'll see far more of the nests, and you can have a look at the detail for each of the nests. It takes quite a lot of time to keep this up to date. We've been quite busy. The red is sadly where we know we've lost nests. One of which is on the Millstream pub, sadly. But we've done a lot of new boxes down in that part of the town. So Swift Mapper. The blue circles are what they call screaming parties. So we get those youngsters and they're all joining up and at height or coming down and investigating around eaves, because that's an indication that they could be nesting there in future years. So it's of interest scientifically. And the RSPB and the Herts Bird Club and other people and British Trust for Ornithology are using this as their resource. Coming soon. So that's me with some Swift bricks, and those Swift bricks are matched to the Birchley Green development. And hopefully, if you can see that sort of model, those kind people in the estate agents allowed me to take lots of pictures of their model. That high wall above Bull Plain, there should be 7 Swift bricks in the top of that, all being well. And there's another one which is south facing, but as Swift bricks are inbuilt, that's less of an issue, which is sort of facing back towards, over towards St Andrews, I guess. Or over towards All Saints, that will have 7 in as well. So we are putting some Swift bricks into that development. Fingers crossed, I'm waiting for the pictures. And Macmillans have very kindly offered to fund some boxes and to have them on their walls. If anybody knows somebody with a cherry picker, because this is not in the scope of a ladder, and the fire brigade have been asked, but they haven't yet come through. We're going to have about 25 boxes on the walls of the Macmillans, and that is an excellent, excellent site for Swifts. You can help us. You can help us with planning. I know you guys know far more about it than I do, and it'd be nice if we could sort of combine efforts on certain things. Install boxes, please do get in touch. We're going to have plenty, and we can't have enough, really. Push for biodiversity gain in planning applications. Help us define this. If you know where they are, we think they know where they are. If you know where house martings are, anything, we're interested. Do the gardening for the insects. There's some great stuff going on across Hertford in terms of green gardening, leaving green spaces to grow a bit. That's great. And I think I'm conscious I might have overrun slightly, but I'll leave it there. If you want more information, there are plenty of books on Swifts. The Natural History book, NHBS, I think it's Book Society, actually. It's a great website. If you want natural history books, that's the best place to go. They're splendid people. And Swifts in the Tower is strongly recommended, as is the RSPB book. I will, at this point, fall silent and let's see if we've got any questions.
Thank you so much, Clive. That was absolutely wonderful. Wonderful, not only in terms of these amazing and fascinating birds, but also the introductions you gave us to some very fascinating and dedicated people, and the lengths to which they're prepared to go, and obviously the lengths to which you are prepared to go. How did you actually begin, I wondered?
Well, I stopped working in the civil service just before lockdown. So I finished Brexit. And then I did, and so I was one of Jenny Sherwin, who started this off, one of her sort of keenest, Jenny Rawson, sorry, Jenny Rawson now, one of her keenest sort of supporters. And once she had to go to Suffolk, she asked me if I'd take it on. And I said yes. And I've got, Jenny, had a full-time job. I haven't now. I can dabble in this stuff and spend far more time doing it. So. And I'm a very keen birdwatcher, I should say, and I love Swifts, always have. So.
Of course, yes. Other people, I think it's time to throw the floor open. There is certainly still plenty of time for a few questions.
Well, I'm going to wait until
I can. Annette, was that a hand?
No.
Anybody else got a question as yet?
Oh, there's a couple there.
Yes, Barry's got a question, I can see. So Barry.
Yeah, I live in Fordwich Hill.
Yes.
Every summer we get parties of swifts screaming around the rooftops. I'm not aware of whether they're nesting or not. Do you know the answer to that?
So we haven't found any there. We've put some boxes there. We've started, not many. Fordwich Rise. And there are birds, there's a group that nest in North Road Avenue, which is not too far away from you as the swift flies, and they certainly fly over towards your side. And then Seal Road,
yes,
still one of the best places in Hertford for swifts.
Yeah,
it's got it all going on. It's got open eaves, it's got allotments for feeding, and it's great.
They were still conspicuous this summer, almost as many as I've seen, say, 30 years ago.
Great. That's what we'd like to see. And I think, again, a lot of those are going to be youngsters. So actually, Fordwich Rise is on our to-do list for this year because we'd kind of like to get a few more boxes up that way.
Well, I'm Fordwich Hill, but I'd be happy to have boxes.
Thank you. We'll put our details up at the end and we'll be on the recording, and please do get in touch. It'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other people, is that John with a hand raised?
Which John?
John Bevan.
Right.
John, you need to unmute.
Yeah.
Can't you unmute it?
Well, I'm trying. See.
I think we can hear you, John, actually.
Okay. What other birds and wildlife need similar protection to swifts?
So in Hertford, So if we're talking about the urban environment, I would say we can still do more for house sparrows, and there's definitely the RSPB is starting to talk about them having turned the corner. It's not entirely clear why, but we've certainly got colonies where we didn't have them before, and we've seen a lot going around Hertford this year, and a lot of starlings actually. Starlings, another bird that's red listed. You know, we all grew up with starlings being so common. So putting boxes up for some of the birds that are on the face of it have been common in our lifetimes is no bad thing. Bat boxes, certainly. And let's not forget the invertebrates and the flora and fauna. And Hertford's fortunate in having green fingers and an awful lot of garden space where people can do really good things for wildlife. When we've been behind some houses, the length of the garden, some of the gardens that back onto each other in Hertford. So you get these big squares of greenery. And people tell us they've got grass snakes, they've got, you know, toads, frogs, they've got all sorts of things going on in these big areas. If you put ponds in, let the grass grow a bit longer. We haven't seen too much plastic grass in Hertford yet, but please don't put any more down. Dragonflies will come to your pond, you know, and then it all kind of mutually reinforces. I think looking after the small things can help some of the bigger things come back as well.
Thank you.
I should say, sorry, I don't think I said on the talk. We think we've got about 100 pairs now. If we extrapolate back to 95, where if we've gone back about 58% reduction, then we'd probably be about 300 pairs. If we extrapolate back to the middle of the last century, my guess, what it's worth, is you probably over 1,000 pairs. So I think we're at about 10% of what we've had historically.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? I had a follow-up question of a slightly different kind. They must be quite sociable birds. I was very struck from the map how there's a clear concentration east of Tesco, and then another concentration that's kind of Port Vale and places vaguely of that kind.
Yes.
So they really must be very sociable, I'm thinking.
They are very, and there's a wonderful house in George Street, just off Port Vale, next to the what was the pub that's going? I forget the name of it. Two Brewers. It's got 5 pairs, cheek by jowl in the front and 2 at the back, and that's not unusual. They nest in really tiny cottage, and that's just on the frontage. So they'll nest cheek by jowl. It's not clear why they're not doing it in more of the houses, because they've not all been restored. So, you know, there are still some mysteries to be unravelled. It may be to do with insulation in the roof, difficult to judge. But they do nest in very large colonies. And again, that Brian Sage book from the late 50s talks about the Bishop Stortford Hospital with 120 pairs. The old workhouse, the chap who lives on Cromwell Road told me it used to be absolutely full of swifts nesting in the summer. And that's what we've lost. So yeah, if we can get colonies going, you'll see where we put boxes up. They're close by each other, a lot of them, and you can get multiple boxes. They're just a line of 8 boxes, and you can put as many times 8 as you want. And hopefully one day you'll have, you know, large colonies in small space.
Right. Well, thank you very much. There's a last chance for anybody to bring forward a question. But I'm not seeing any hands raised. So I think we're probably going to close what has been a completely fascinating session. I'll look at Hertford in a different way after this, definitely. So thank you so much from Hertford Civic Society, Clive. That was absolutely brilliant.
Well, you're very welcome, and do keep in touch, and we'd like to work with you on planning. We're joining, by the way, just so you know.
Excellent. Well, you couldn't be doing better then.
Yes.
And we do have some planners here tonight. Terry and Richard, for instance, in particular. So I'm sure that they will have digested what you're saying. And of course, we will have this talk, as I think we've discussed, on the website in due course. And it will be a resource that people can turn to.
Yes.
So many thanks.
I don't know if you'll have had our contact slide. I'll put it up in a minute, but do get in touch. We're on Facebook as well for those who use Facebook. We've got an email address which is on there. And the other thing that we do on our awareness is we do Swift walks in the summer. So we take people around to see some of these places.
Well, that's good to know.
So if anybody's interested, you'd be very welcome to join.
Okay, well, I think that's more or less it, unless anyone has a final thought. I think it's probably time for handing back to Terry and to draw the event to a close.
I'm trying to get it displayed.
Okay, I'm stopping recording now, folks.
Yeah. Fine.